I was branching out. That's when the cannibalism started, eating of the heart and the arm muscle. It was a way of making me feel that they were a part of me. At first it was just curiosity, and then it became compulsive.
Jeffrey Dahmer's story doesn't begin with blood. It begins with a boy, quiet, awkward, and terrified of abandonment long before he ever terrified anyone else. Early childhood, a lonely beginning. Born in 1960 in Milwaukee and raised in a middle-class Ohio home, Dahmer wasn't an abused child in the typical sense. There were no beatings, no overt violence, but there was emotional chaos. His father, Lionel, a chemistry student, spent most of his time studying. His mother, Joyce, battled severe anxiety, postpartum depression, and later addiction. Arguments were constant. Silence, even worse. Jeffrey learned early that if he was hurting, no one was coming to check on him. By the time he was 4, he had undergone a double hernia surgery. Some psychologists believe the trauma of the procedure and the fear he experienced being left alone in the hospital may have shaped his detachment. But Dahmer himself later said something far more chilling.
I was dead inside long before I started killing.
The birth of dark curiosity. Like many children, Dahmer was curious about animals. But unlike most, his curiosity focused on what lay inside them. June 1978. Jeffrey Dahmer was 18 years old, a quiet, withdrawn teenager whose parents' marriage had fully collapsed. He was living alone in the family home, completely unsupervised, completely unnoticed. And then, one summer afternoon, he saw a young man walking down the road. Stephen Hicks, 19 years old, a hitchhiker looking for a ride to a concert. Jeffrey picked him up, a simple invitation that turned deadly. At first, everything was normal. They talked, they drank beer, they listened to music. But as the hours passed, Hicks said he needed to leave. And that sentence, "I have to go," ignited Jeffrey's darkest fear of all, being abandoned. Jeffrey panicked. He grabbed a dumbbell from the basement and struck Stephen Hicks in the back of the head. Then he strangled him. It was the first time Jeffrey felt the rush of having complete control over a body. Dahmer became an alcoholic before he turned 20. He drank in class, he drank at home. He drank to forget. He drank to silence the fantasies growing inside him. College lasted 1 semester. The army lasted 2 years. He was discharged for drinking, but not before rumors surfaced of him drugging fellow soldiers. One of them later said, he was quiet, but something about him felt wrong. Dahmer drifted through life, unstable, isolated, and increasingly consumed by the urge to kill again. And in 1987, he finally did. After killing Stephen Tuomi, Jeffrey Dahmer began living a double life. One where he appeared to be a quiet, troubled young man trying to get his life together. And another where he hunted men, preserved their remains, and indulged in fantasies that grew darker with every passing month. From 1987 to 1990, Dahmer lived with his elderly grandmother in West Allis, Wisconsin. To her, he was a shy grandson who struggled with alcohol. To everyone else, he was forgettable, polite, almost painfully reserved. But in the basement of her home, Dahmer was becoming something far more dangerous. The first kill in Grandma's house. Just a few months after Tuomi, Dahmer met 14-year-old James Dockstader. He lured him home with the promise of money for posing for photographs. One of the tactics Dahmer would repeat again and again. Dockstader never made it out of the house alive. Dahmer hid the body in the basement before dismembering it. But he slipped. He grew sloppy. The odor began to drift up through the vents. When his grandmother asked about the smell, Jeffrey blamed his taxidermy hobby. She believed him. The pattern emerges. A year later, Dahmer killed again. This time, 24-year-old Strongly Guerrero. While he was killing the victims, he had purposefully drugging the victims and killing them with quiet precision, and saving bones, dismembering them with quiet precision. He was not killing for hate or revenge. He was killing to create a fantasy where the victim couldn't leave him, ever. From there, he later said, "I wanted to keep them with me, to have someone completely under my control." A family on the edge. His grandmother eventually grew uncomfortable. Guests coming and going at night, strange smells, strange noises. She asked him to move out. It was the best decision she ever made, even though she had no idea what she'd narrowly escaped. Because once Dahmer lived alone, his darkness exploded. The murders became more ritualistic, almost industrial. He bought a 52-gallon blue drum, strong, and filled it with acid. He arranged skulls in cabinets. He stored hearts, biceps, and flesh in plastic containers in the fridge. He photographed every stage, from living victims to their skeletal remains. They found thousands of maggots, evidence of just how long some bodies were left exposed. But there was one moment, one horrible moment, where the world came this close to stopping Dahmer and failed. Konarak had escaped from Dahmer's apartment, naked, bleeding, drugged, and barely conscious. Two women found him stumbling in the street and immediately called police. The police arrived. When officers arrived, they found a naked, injured minor, unable to speak coherently, terrified, trying to flee. But then Jeffrey Dahmer walked up, calm, smiling, shirtless, holding a beer, and told the officers the boy was his 19-year-old boyfriend, and that they'd simply had a lover's quarrel. Despite the protests of witnesses, despite the obvious signs that something was wrong, the police escorted Konarak back into Dahmer's apartment. Those same officers later joked about reuniting lovers over the radio. What they missed. Inside the apartment, while the officers took a quick look around, they stood just a few feet away from a human head in the refrigerator, a decomposing body in the bedroom, Polaroids of dismembered victims, the blue acid drum. But they didn't check the fridge. They didn't search the bedroom. They didn't verify the boy's age. They simply left. Within the hour, Konarak was murdered. His skull, later found in Dahmer's collection. This moment became one of the most shocking law enforcement failures in modern American history. And Dahmer? He continued killing, feeling invincible. Dahmer began performing experiments. He drilled holes in his victims' skulls and injected hydrochloric acid, boiling water, in an attempt to create living, controllable zombies who would stay near him forever. Every victim died, but Dahmer kept trying. The Shrine of Bones. He began planning a shrine, a black table filled with polished skulls, candles, skeletons, and painted bones. A place where he could sit, surrounded by the men he had made his own. Dahmer described it in chilling detail. It would have been a place for meditation, a place where I felt no one could ever leave me. But he never finished it. By the summer of 1991, Jeffrey Dahmer's world had become a closed loop of desire, panic, and unstoppable compulsion. He was killing faster, taking greater risks, and slipping deeper into obsession. But the strangest part? He was also losing control. Curtis Straughter, 18 years old, Dahmer lured him with the promise of money for posing for photos. Straughter fought back, more than most, but Jeffrey's fear of abandonment always erupted into violence. Errol Lindsay, the 19-year-old victim who fought with such intensity that Dahmer remembered him for the rest of his life. It was with Lindsay that Dahmer perfected his zombie experiment. He drilled into Lindsay's skull and injected acid while the young man was still alive. Lindsay woke up screaming, "Headache, what time is it?" On July 22, 1991, Jeffrey Dahmer met 32-year-old Tracy Edwards at a mall. He offered him $100 to come home, drink beer, and take photos. Edwards reluctantly agreed. He had no idea he was walking into a slaughterhouse. Inside apartment 213, As Tracy stepped inside, he noticed foul smell, black garbage bags stacked in the corner, strange chemicals, a blue drum in the bedroom, a dripping freezer, a power drill on the floor. This wasn't a normal apartment. The horror came when Tracy looked at Dahmer's bed and saw dozens of photographs taped to the walls. Photos of men alive, unconscious, dismembered. Dahmer quietly placed a handcuff on Tracy's wrist. That's when Tracy knew something was very, very wrong. He pressed it to Tracy's chest and whispered, "I'm gonna take your heart." The police found inside Jeffrey Dahmer's apartment would shock the world. At first, Dahmer tried to act calm. He said the key to the handcuffs was in the bedroom. That was his mistake. As one officer walked toward the dresser, he noticed something strange, a Polaroid photograph. He picked it up. His face went pale. He looked at Dahmer and said, "These are real." The discoveries that followed, police immediately handcuffed Dahmer and began searching the apartment. What they found was almost beyond belief. A human head in the refrigerator, strong. A portion 3 more skulls in the bedroom. A portion 2. A torso dissolving in a blue acid drum. A portion 3. Preserved organs. A portion 4. Boxes filled with bones, dismemberment. Several hundreds of Polaroids documenting murders, dismemberment, and staged skeletons. Strong. Hearts in the freezer. A portion. The officer who opened the fridge later said, "It was the worst day of my life." One detective described the interviews as listening to pure evil, spoken in the calmest voice imaginable. Why did he do it? Dahmer gave several explanations. Fear of abandonment, desire for control, loneliness, obsession with bodies, sexual compulsion, fantasy fulfillment. But then he said something even more disturbing. "It was my way of making them stay. I didn't want them to leave." Dahmer wasn't killing for revenge or rage. He was killing because he believed death was the only way to possess someone forever. Why not political revenge? In January 1992, Jeffrey Dahmer went on trial in Milwaukee. Crowds lined up outside the courthouse. Reporters filled every seat. Victims' families cried, shouted, prayed. Dahmer pleaded guilty, but not sane. The defense argument is Jeffrey's populace. He had uncontrollable compulsions. He lived in a fantasy world. He was unable to distinguish right from wrong. He was mentally ill. The experiments, cannibalism. They said no sane person could do these things. The prosecution's argument. Prosecutors said Dahmer hid his crimes. He covered his tracks. He picked victims carefully. He acted logically before and after murders. He was fully aware of his actions. They argued he wasn't insane. He was evil. One moment that shook the courtroom. During the trial, the sister of victim Errol Lindsay exploded in grief. She screamed, "Jeffrey, I hate you. I will kill you. You don't know what pain is." The courtroom had to be cleared. Not even the judge could contain the human impact of the atrocities being described. The verdict. After 2 weeks of testimony, the jury reached a conclusion. Jeffrey Dahmer was legally sane. Guilty on 15 murder counts. He was sentenced to 957 years in prison, but he would serve only 3. November 28, 1994, a day that would bring an end to Dahmer's life inside those concrete walls. That morning, Dahmer was assigned a work detail with 2 inmates. One side is Soul Jesse, who was convicted of murder. Strong Christopher Scarver, serving a life sentence. The 3 men were left unsupervised as they performed routine cleaning tasks. That morning, tension in the air. Inmates had long expressed anger toward Dahmer. Some were disturbed by his crimes. Others were angered by his jokes. Rumors circulated that several prisoners had confronted him. Some claimed Dahmer enjoyed provoking reactions. Whatever the environment truly was, It was volatile. What happened in the gym area? During their work assignment, Dahmer and Anderson were suddenly attacked by Scarver. The event unfolded quickly. Dahmer was critically injured. Prison staff attempted to revive him. He was taken to a nearby hospital. At 9:11 a.m., Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer was pronounced dead. He was 34 years old. Christopher Scarver's explanation. Scarver later said he believed Dahmer showed no remorse. He also claimed he had been pushed over the edge by Dahmer's behavior in prison. Others suggested a different motivation, not personal rage, but symbolic justice. This moment became one of the most debated prison incidents in modern crime history. For many families, Dahmer's death brought a complicated mix of emotions. A sense of justice, a sense of unfinished grief, a feeling that the answers they wanted died with him. One family member said, "We never received justice. We just received an ending." Public reaction. Dahmer's crimes had already changed Milwaukee forever. His death reopened debates about prison safety, the treatment of high-profile inmates, mental illness and criminal responsibility, police failures, systemic racism in law enforcement, media sensationalism. He became a symbol, not just of evil, but of the consequences of a system that failed at nearly every critical moment. But the fate of his most infamous possessions, the skulls, bones, Polaroids, and tools, became a topic of legal and ethical debate. Ultimately, the physical remains of his crimes were destroyed. Pro's symbolic attempt to erase the instruments of such darkness from the world. In accordance with his own request, psychologists, criminologists, and forensic experts have studied him more than almost any other serial killer in modern history. Their findings paint a portrait of a profoundly damaged and deeply isolated individual. Pro. 1. Social isolation. Dahmer was withdrawn from childhood. He struggled to form real connections. He feared being abandoned. This fear became the foundation for his later compulsions. Obsession with control. A recurring theme in Dahmer's life was the desire for complete, permanent control. His crimes were not acts of sudden rage. They were attempts to create a world where no one could leave him. Paraphilic disorders. Experts identified multiple compulsions: necrophilia, objectification, fetishistic attraction to anatomy. These disorders intensified over time, merging into a single, destructive pattern. The role of fantasy. Dahmer lived more in his imagination than in reality. His crimes were attempts to make his fantasies real, with devastating consequences. Lack of early intervention. Nearly every specialist agrees. The warning signs were present early, but no one intervened, and the system was not equipped to recognize the danger. Dahmer targeted vulnerable young men, many of whom were Black, Asian, also Latino, LGBTQ+, economically disadvantaged. Their cases were often not taken seriously, raising questions about systemic inequalities in policing. Pro-crime culture. Dahmer's story shaped modern true crime documentaries, podcasts, and streaming series. But with that came criticism. Are we learning from these tragedies? Or consuming them as entertainment? P.S. It's a question society continues to grapple with. Jeffrey Dahmer is gone, but the shadows he cast still stretch across American culture. His crimes are studied in universities, discussed in psychology forums, debated in criminal justice classrooms, and analyzed in documentaries watched around the world. Why does his story continue to haunt us? Why do we keep returning to apartment 213? One reason is simple. It forces us to confront the darkest possibilities of the human mind. Another is far more uncomfortable. It exposes the failures of society, the blind spots of institutions, and the tragic cost of ignoring warning signs. A mirror to society. Every aspect of the Dahmer case reveals something deeper about policing, about mental health, about marginalization, about the vulnerability of certain communities, about the consequences of indifference. His crimes didn't happen in a vacuum. They happened in neighborhoods where people were overlooked, voices were ignored, and systems were overwhelmed or uninterested. A warning for the future. Criminologists argue that cases like Dahmer's must be studied in detail, not to sensationalize horrors. For an upcoming episode. It is that evil can grow quietly, patiently, in unnoticed corners. And if it is not confronted, it evolves. And if it is not confronted, it evolves. In every documentary, in every article about Jeffrey Dahmer, one truth must never be forgotten. This is not his story alone. The victims were more than names, more than headlines, more than statistics. They were sons, brothers, friends, existence. A polite man who committed monstrous acts, a shy boy who became a predator, a quiet neighbor who created a chamber of horrors, a man who seemed ordinary until he wasn't. He forces us to confront an idea many people fear. Evil doesn't always look like evil. Strong. Sometimes it looks like the man next door, the coworker, the student, the stranger on the bus. Dahmer is a reminder that horror can hide behind normalcy, and that we must never assume we can see danger with the naked eye. This is not paranoia. It is awareness, and awareness saves lives. As we close this documentary, one truth becomes clear. Jeffrey Dahmer was not a monster born in the dark. He was a monster shaped in plain sight. A child who slipped through the cracks. A teenager ignored during his descent. A man whose crimes were enabled by silence, by systemic failures, and by moments where intervention could have saved lives. This story is not just about one individual. It's about the consequences of inaction. It's about the importance of listening, watching, and understanding the signals people send before their shadows grow too large to contain. And now, as the lights fade on apartment 213, we are left with questions that linger in the quiet. Questions about evil. Questions about responsibility. Questions about how many lives might have been saved if someone had looked a little closer. Before we end, I want to ask you, the viewer, to share your thoughts in the comments. 1. What moment in this story shocked you the most, and why? 2. Do you think Jeffrey Dahmer was born dangerous or shaped by his environment? 3. Which system failed the most in this case? The police, the mental health system, or society itself? 4. Do you believe the Konarak incident was the turning point that could have prevented the remaining murders? Stops. How should society balance understanding the psychology of criminals with honoring the memories of victims? Stops. What lessons do you think the world should carry forward from this case? Your voice matters, and the discussion around this case is far from over.